it turns out that when we had a questionnaire in Chattis for parents who were coming for regular visits, of parents of 0 to 3-year-olds, time-life balance was the most often free text response they entered. So we felt kind of stupid, actually, because we had included all kinds of things that they could check off on a list, but a lot of them entered that. So if you're curious, this is actually the data, the raw data, which, as you see, number 1 up here was time-life balance. Almost 24% of parents who wrote something in felt as though that was the hardest part of parenting for them. And notice what number 2 is, actually, worry, stress. So maybe that's not too far behind time-life balance. And obviously there's a variety of other things, but if you take a look at which ones are things that as healthcare providers we're geared up and ready to do, we're ready for health, we're ready for disability. I hope we're ready for eating problems. I hope we're ready for behavior problems and sleeping problems. But a lot of these are things that you might call behavioral issues, but they also are social issues, and time-life balance is sort of one of those. So I decided that in the process of working on this for Chattis, to strengthen what Chattis provides back to parents, that I better do some more thinking about it myself and talk to the group about it. So what do you all think about that issue? Like, is this something that parents are bringing to you as a concern? And are they doing it just with a sigh, or are they hoping for advice from you? I'm wondering about that.
I think it's a problem. They're just not vocalizing it till the end of the appointment. I think we have a lot of, parenting, where we work, we have a lot of, parenting classes, and we're getting more, of the, meditation. We have a lot of meditation online, for parents and for anyone to use. So, we refer our parents and, kids and teenagers to that. But
how about others? Other people? Anybody else running into this as a problem with your patients, where they are struggling time-life balance?
This is Stephanie. I work specifically with families who have children with special needs, and it's definitely something that they struggle with, but they often don't vocalize it.
Yes. I think they don't think we have anything to offer. And so part of our goal here is to come up with some things to help people have some good answers for that. I think Dr. Sterner wanted to comment about the other parts of Best Hardest. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to mention, someone said this was a doorknob issue on the way out, and what we're doing Chattis, and the main reason that we developed Chattis is that you want to decide how to spend your time. What's the most important thing? So there is what are your priorities? What would you like to talk about at this visit is what this questionnaire is about. And then out of that, you can decide, how do we allocate our time? We're collecting all the safety data, all this other stuff.
That Dr. Sterner and I are developmental behavioral pediatricians, and so we see basically all child behavior problems. That's what our consultation practice is, developmental problems and behavior problems too. And one of the things that strikes me is that when parents feel burned out, it is a vicious cycle for child behavior. So let's say you've got a normal kid, or maybe you have a kid who's hyperactive or particularly fussy and irritable, which was one of the main hardest parts also listed, and they require more of the parent. So the parent has this constant demand from the child, and Stephanie, you can particularly relate to that, and they have a lot of things they need to do and not enough time for themselves. And so what happens is they get crabby, so they get irritable. And what happens when a parent gets irritable? Well, what do you think happens when a parent gets irritable? Does the kid back off?
They escalate, yeah.
They escalate, so they actually get worried about the irritable parent, and they close in, and they start clinging more, they act anxious, or they may get oppositional, basically trying to engage the parent who they experience as backing off from them. And then the parent has more work to do. So the irritability of parent burnout is a very important part of some behavior problems. So it's important in well-child visits, which is what I gave you the numbers for before, but it's especially important when you have a behavior complaint from the child to start with. So I've outlined, I'm just going to run through here some things that I've been thinking about, and I conferred with Dr. Chernoff. I don't know if she's going to be able to join us today, about what kinds of things can you do because, you know.
I'm here.
Oh, you made it. Excellent.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm here. Great.
Super. And Robin Chernoff is also a developmental behavioral pediatrician and a good friend of us and a friend of Chattis. And so please pipe in here as we go along, Robin. So I think one of the first things to do is to help people understand how their tension and irritability is affecting behavior and give them permission to have that be something that they take on as a project, particularly reducing activities. So in the modern day and age, a lot of people are really they make themselves busier than perhaps they would have to otherwise. So everybody wants to get to the finish line before they're 40 these days, or maybe even before they're 30, and they may need some help understanding and just talking about the fact that for right now, they should surrender to parenting their young child. And surrender is something that I experienced some of this clearly myself because I was certainly a physician before we had any children. And if you can let yourself be completely present, you might want to call that surrendering. And that means that for this period of years, which go by really fast, they may want to reduce some of the goals they had for, learning to play the violin or doing another job or having enough money to buy a second car or whatever it is. Now, keeping in mind that I'm going to talk a little bit more about families who are totally stressed because they're just trying to survive. So I'm not ignoring that. But for some parents, they have the opportunity to reconsider how quickly they're trying to achieve things in their life. And also, sometimes this kind of burnout and time pressure is because their partner is not doing his or her share. So negotiating tasks with the partner is really important. And sometimes when people complain about, I don't have enough time, what they're really saying is, he comes home from work and lies on the sofa and watches the football game. And so it really is about partner communication.
I think it's also giving them permission to ask for help from their other support system. Lots of people feel real uncomfortable with this, but sometimes there is an aunt, a family member, a friend, even where you can share. If you have 2 kids for a whole day, but then you have no kids because the other person has the kid for a couple of hours, a sharing can really be helpful. So I give people permission to say, who could you ask for help so that you could have an hour out of your own time for yourself.
Right, and it's like they need permission not to be super mom.
Yes.
Not trying to do it all by themselves is part of the permission you're talking about, I think.
Exactly. And the other thing I always talk about is if people worry that your house is not clean, then they're welcome to come clean it. Because that's another big thing for their families that, I have to have it perfect all the time. And the answer is that's just not reality. That was all I wanted.
And who do you think those people that they're experiencing pressure from usually are?
Grandparents.
Right. It's often or in-laws, like
the
other generations that forgot what it was like having a 2-year-old in the house, much less a couple of them.
In the study we're about to do, we're intentionally deciding to bring this up at 1 month, and I just want to make a couple of remarks about that. In the Chinese culture, they have protected the mother by there's 30 days where they are not allowed to go out of their room or be with the baby, and everyone else has to take care of everything else. But it start out that way. They start out with a acknowledgement that this is going to take a village, a family at least, And then we've been talking about it, the 1 month visit, just it as part of anticipatory guidance to colic, where it could be 3 hours of crying. That's an opportunity to just begin the conversation, saying, there needs to be someone else. Who is it going to be? So starting it out when the culture doesn't take care of things like that, and the African culture does a better job. This Western culture just doesn't. This is the culture of independent living, and so I think in our culture, the dominant culture here, we have a special duty to do it when we're not protected. Some of these Eastern families have much better protection built in.
Mm-hmm. So the dominant culture now is for most parents to be working outside the home before their child is 1 year old. That's the statistic. And sometimes people have no ability to negotiate the hours that they work or anything else. But if they do have any ability, thinking about setting limits on what work they take home, whether they could reduce their hours at work or reduce some of the roles that they play at work can be important, especially for those super moms. That may or may not be negotiable for people. But one thing that is negotiable is how present they are, emotionally present to their kids when they get home. And some of the things that I've found are helpful for parents is to suggest that if the kid is in daycare or even in the care of a relative, for the parent to take an extra 10 minutes before they come to pick them up so that they can go and take a break, maybe go to the gym or take a walk before they go and greet the child so that they can really be present. It's interesting when you talk to people about picking kids up from daycare in the daycare line, and we went through this ourselves, where this daycare had it down to a science that people would drive up with their car, and the teacher would put the kid in the car, and the parent would buckle them in the car seat and drive away. Well, it was a disaster because the kid needed to greet the parent, and the parent needed to be present for the kid. And so there were any number of struggles and fights in the car. Instead, they may have to, if they have that policy, they may have to pull over and park someplace and just sit and talk to the child and maybe read them a book or give them a snack and look them face-to-face in the eye. And that can really improve the behavior a lot. If that's not the way it works and the kid is in their house, when they get home, they shouldn't rush over and start to cook dinner right away, because then they'll have a kid hanging on their leg while they're trying to do that. So instead, having individual time with the child when they first get into the house can be important. Now you might say, how do you figure this out? Well, actually, it's not too difficult. You can just say to the family, so when is it the hardest to deal with your child? And they'll often say, when I first get home, say, well, what do you do when you walk in the door? And they say, well, first I change my clothes, and then or take a shower, I change my clothes, and then I make dinner. And what you don't hear in that description is anything about re-engaging with the child who has been missing the parent all day long. So part of this is really helping parents to revise their expectations. It's really useful to know, I should have done this as a quiz, but it's useful to know that the typical at-home mother who's at home full-time, does not have an outside job, spends 20 minutes one-on-one with their kid, not doing work per day. Well, when you tell people that, you can help really revise their expectations about how much one-on-one time do you really need with your kid to do a decent job. And if you think about little kids, they typically need to touch base about every 3 to 5 minutes. I'm not talking about babies. I'm talking about toddlers here. And knowing that that's what it's going to be like, any kind of sustained alone time for yourself really probably has to wait until after the kids go to bed. Or you need some kind of help, or you need some kind of token activity. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit next. So Robin has already brought up the idea of asking for help, and everybody needs a break. But one of the things that I find really useful is the idea that the way you get a break doesn't mean that you need to get an expensive babysitter who's in college now and go out with your husband to the movies and dinner. That's that's a very large break. It's a very desirable break, but it's expensive, and it requires a lot of organization. So how do you get little breaks so that you don't lose your mind? Well, one idea is to hire an 8-year-old in your neighborhood to come in and play with your kids. Kids love 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds. Now, you wouldn't leave them alone in the house, but it gives the parent a chance to do something else than be constantly attending to their child. And they may need a little coaching that during those moments, instead of going and doing more, running around and doing cleaning and laundry, that they may need to go take a shower or just go sit and read a magazine for a few minutes to restore themselves. So again, that's kind of giving them permission to do that. And as Robin mentioned, maybe there's some tasks that need to be given up, particularly cleaning the house, possibly even some cooking tasks. Order pizza a little bit more, or cook a whole batch of food and save it for the weekend. Save it up to be able to spread out over the week. So the kind of help that people can get doesn't always have to be help that they purchase. Another thing that I found really useful is basically token activities. Now, Suzanne, I wonder how this fits in with your meditation, because you'll notice meditation at the bottom of this slide. That if you're totally mindful about the break that you take, it feels like a bigger break. So when you ask people, what would help you feel as though you were getting restored, they usually say to me something like, well, if I could go to a spa for the weekend, or something that's like totally not possible with young children, and not really good for them necessarily either. So thinking about how they could substitute smaller token activities to restore themselves, and asking them, what can you do to fill your tank? So maybe they could get a Backrub from their spouse instead of going to the spa, or maybe they could go for a walk every night instead of scheduling a 2-week cruise, or maybe they could watch 10 minutes of video clips on YouTube instead of a whole movie, because the rest of their responsibilities don't really allow for that. They may even need to set a timer so that they know that they got a certain kind of a break. Say, okay, I'm only going to do this activity for 15 minutes. And they can start to discover that it doesn't actually take that long to feel like you had a break if you are focused on being present. So, Suzanne, you talked about meditation. How about mindfulness training? Have any of you had any experience with mindfulness training yourself, or with giving that kind of opportunity to your patients to remind them to be completely present? Because it's something that's a skill. And actually, sometimes it's in the context of a group that people give themselves permission. They hear other parents who have similar situations. They can problem solve it. And I will bet that finding out how to take a break and manage time is actually one of the top topics that come up in groups like that. So it gives permission. And sometimes we found that the parent groups we've been running for a long time, the parents often get to know each other in those groups, and then they become sort of the co-babysitters. So this is an example of where trading a kid, like part of the reason people don't want to put a kid in respite, even for a day or a weekend, is because they don't know who it is who's going to be taking care of them. Whereas if they've become familiar with somebody, even if they're not a relative, they can take turns and they trust that other parent's skill set, particularly if they both have kids with disabilities. So it's, I think, a real side benefit of groups is that people get to know each other. So I just wanted to mention that sometimes when people say, I'm having trouble managing my time, what they really mean is that they don't have enough time to have relationships and social support with others. So recommending that they use those little bits of time that we've just talked about creating to make a phone call to somebody just for social reasons, not because they need anything at that time, is good. I noticed with middle-class families, when they pay for sitters or coachers or trainers or lessons, sometimes for themselves, that person becomes a form of social support for them, kind of like your hairdresser. That is a kind of connection. But trading kids with another family doesn't cost anything. I've also noticed that people who are in the homeschooling network often have a closer relationships with other families than people who belong to the public school system. That it's a way for people to spend time with each other during the day. Parents are engaged in that. Another thing that I often recommend is participating in a religious organization of some kind, because usually there's child care provided. It's free, and if they actually go to services, they may have an experience of meditation at the service itself.
Correct.
Plus, they feel like they can trust the people who are providing child care in that situation. And it's funny, the more secular our country has become, I think that a huge source of social support from religious organizations has gone away. And people kind of forget that that's something they could be getting out of it. They say, I'm not a religious person. You can say, well, you know what? You don't actually have to believe in anything particular to show up and be able to take advantage of the social organization that's present with a religious institution. Now, here's one of my pet peeves, actually, and that is, can you actually make time? And the answer is, yes, you probably can, and here's where to look. So one of Robin's favorite things to ask is, what fills your tank? Make a list of the activities that you're currently doing. Which ones actually are satisfying? And which ones really aren't satisfying? Which ones are actually not providing you any kind of respite or pleasure or anything? And the main place to look is at screen time. So this is a really hot topic. This is in 2015, this was the average American consumption during one day. 147 minutes of television, 103 minutes of computer, 151 minutes of smartphone, 43 minutes with a tablet. Now, if you add all of that up, some of it must be simultaneous, but what's missing?
20 minutes with the child.
20 minutes with the child and more sleep. So we know that media is interfering with sleep, it's interfering with relationships, it's interfering with intimacy for couples, and it certainly gets in the way of children feeling attended to. And, of course, it's so much easier to hand the tablet to the kid to get some quiet, but then if the parent does that and gets on the computer themselves, overall, that's not a satisfying interaction for any of them. So we
don't know how much of the 20 minutes were included having a smartphone between them.
Well, this was done a long time ago before there was a smartphone.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't know that.
So there's some really cool resources the American Academy of Pediatrics has put out there, and you can just Google this. One is called the Media Calculator, and the other one is called the Family Media Plan. So the Media Calculator basically takes a 24-hour day, and you put in how much sleep you think the kid needs and how much time they need for exercise and how much it takes.
In how much the child needs. Then you can
adjust it
around that.
Right, to help people be more realistic about what do they do with their 24 hours. And then the Family Media Plan is an interactive function that you can look at on the internet that helps you plan out how you prioritize your time for your family. And the intention is really to do it with older kids to help them see that they can't really spend 3 hours playing video games if they're going to accomplish the other things that they need to fit into their day. But it's non-judgmental. It kind of lets people come up with their own conclusions. Gosh, maybe 3 hours of video games isn't okay for our family life. So I encourage you to go ahead and look at that. There's no cost for it. Just go to the American Academy of Pediatrics and put that in. Now, I want to mention that sometimes when people say, I don't have enough time, their exhaustion is really depression, and that we should be screening for depression in adults as well as in kids. And sometimes the irritability of not having enough time may actually be marital discord, that they can't negotiate things with their partner and they feel overwhelmed. So they come in saying, I don't have enough time for all the things I need to do, and then they turn a glance over to the partner over there who they really feel is responsible for their distress. So one of the things we know about positive outcomes from parenting is if people are satisfied with their role. It's not whether mothers go to work outside of the home or not. It's whether they're satisfied with their role as a parent, whether they're satisfied with their role as a worker. And there are some people who are better suited to going to work and taking care of 2 or 3 little kids. So I have had some parents where I've actually suggested that they should go get a job and make enough money so that they can afford to pay for some child care for their kids, because they're not happy being the parent of young kids, and they're making their kids crazy while they're with their discontent. So I guess all of this is kind of to say that it takes a village. It's much better if we have social support and can share children back and forth. In some cultures in Africa, for example, that Ray was making reference to, and that Hillary Clinton talks about too in her book, is that the expectation is that the kids get some care from aunts and uncles and grandparents, that you don't have to spend delicate negotiation time figuring out how you can squeak a half an hour of child care out of your relatives. Everybody does it because that's the way the culture works. But we're sort of long past those days right now, and so it becomes an issue that really has to do with life satisfaction and may be the source of some of the behavior problems that we're having come in to us.
Right. Want to ask people want to talk about the briefcase for the well child?
Right. We have a few minutes left. Does anybody have a case that they would like to bring up that we could talk about?
An appropriate kind of thing would be something that comes up in well child care.
Anybody have an issue?
I see. I mean, the custody problem, whether it's legal or informal, I think that goes along with you. We were talking about leaving daycare and coming home. These parents exchanging the kids. How the kids transition between one. Like a lot of times they have 1 week with one parent, 1 week with another, or the weekends with dad. And the kids and the parents have really problems with that transition. Acting out when they come back. What do they do when they come back from the parent, and what do they do when they go? That I guess it's sort of like the daycare thing. Going to the one parent and coming back.
That's a very good. That's a very good one. So there are different problems at different ages. So the little kids, the main thing you see is fussiness, right? If they're not verbal yet, if they've been passed back and forth, it can be very upsetting for them. And also, they may not have been kept on a similar schedule. So especially for little kids, but big kids too, trying to have the same schedule at both houses. Now, of course, if the parents had been that good at negotiating schedules, they probably wouldn't have gotten a divorce in the first place, right? So it's often very difficult to have people adhere to the same schedule on each side. But I would say that the main problem with acting out when people come back is a failure to do that kind of sit-down special time when they first come back, and also being careful that the parent who's receiving them doesn't grill them about what they just did with the other parent. Have you noticed that as a problem?
Yes, exactly.
Right, they're trying to spy on the child's experience. Now, granted, they worry about it because, again, if they hadn't gotten along so well with the other parent, they wouldn't have gotten a divorce. But they may not trust that things went well. So just thinking,
and there may be some other agenda. There may be sort of an invisible lawyer in the room, somebody coaching them because they haven't settled on custody to get the goods on this guy, and that's at the expense of the child. That often happens. It happens sometimes. Sometimes it's another situation where they come to the office visit after a weekend with the other parent to document that bad diaper rash that was neglected over the weekend.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So be able to call that out and really understand what's in the best interest of the child. There's a nice book called Beyond the Best Interest of the Child by Solnit, Freud, and Goldstein. And Goldstein was the lawyer, the head of the law school at Yale, and they're child psychiatrists also, talking about know what's best for the child and how to advocate for that at the very start of this. But you're talking about after the legal stuff has happened, but it sometimes takes years to resolve, and the kid's in the middle of it.
And a lot of people aren't even doing legal stuff. This is all, the parents aren't married, and this is totally informal. So I guess that would give us the opportunity to try to make this plan for them.
Yeah, sometimes you end up being like the lawyer for the child. You know, taking that position, kind of like, well, even if you had lawyers or you didn't, so I'm going to take the point of view of the child. What's best here for the child?
I think one of the things that besides trying to keep the schedule, there's actually some rules of engagement for parents who are not in the same household. And Murray Kappelman has written a really good article about that. But one of the rules of engagement is that you don't ask the child to tell on the other parent. So don't, because there's the kill the messenger syndrome, right? That the kid reports that the father let them watch Freddy Krueger or some terrible movie at night, and then the child becomes aware that the parent then gets angry at the other parent. So making sure that people agree that they're not going to have the child be reporting back on what happened when they were gone. That's one thing. Another thing is because the children feel guilty, and we know that guilt in custody arrangements, when children feel guilty about the bad blood between the parents, that's responsible for a lot of the poor outcome in terms of emotional health and acting up, both. And then another good rule of thumb is for the parents to not try to communicate with each other in front of the kid if they can't do it in a civilized way. And nowadays it's pretty easy. You can text, you can email, you can make a phone call after the kid's in bed to negotiate things, not try to do it at the pass-off time. Because sometimes what happens is they're standing there in the parking lot screaming at each other while the kid is waiting to transfer from one to the other. And that's really bad for kids as well as for parents. So people can sometimes be more civilized if they do their communications some other way.
Yeah, because then they try to do it in the exam room too. So we have to always, trying to, they just, the parent just launches, one parent launches into attacking the other who's not there, usually. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so in ordinary circumstance, you want to give the child a chance to play or engage and to help separate from one to the other. And this thing about putting down the other parent is something that I think a pediatrician can have a role in, and helping the parents to understand that they're going to be identifying with that other parent whether they like it or not, and if they put down the other parent, they're putting their kid down, and if they can imagine some positive trait about the other parent that they could talk about, and that's a tough one, but I think if I had to choose one thing for them to do, and that would be it. The other parent is, has ADHD and is irresponsible, but maybe more spontaneous and this and that, and just the way you try to change the frame of reference for a kid, any kid's temperament is something important for these parents to understand. They have an obligation to do.
I think I like to talk to parents about how the kid is always going to be half identified with you and half identified with the partner, as Ray just said. And the other thing that kids do is if you put down the partner, they will often act up in defense of the partner. And so you can see that in the behavior, often with oppositional behavior, where it's unequal who the child is having trouble with. It may be because of that kind of put down that's going on.
And then there's what age do you to go through, I think, an exercise of teaching the child the phone number of both parents. And, a 5-year-old can start to remember a phone number. Well, now it could be easy, but the idea is that they, and they're not going to abuse it. It's just to know that if they needed to talk to their mommy or daddy, they could do it. And just being aware that they have access is a kind of extra degree of safety and buffering that you could do for these kids.